Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Dr. Jordan Seda coming to you live from NYC. Sounding a little bit nasally today, but it's all good. Anyway, are you ready to go to health and back? All right, let's get it. All right, everyone. I have the profound pleasure of being joined by a longtime colleague of mine down in South Carolina, the dirty South. I don't know how dirty it is these days. Maybe not so dirty, but Mr. Houston Armstrong, Human Armstrong. He is one you
Human, only
only
human.
you only human on Instagram, so I'm so used to seeing that. So what's going on, man?
Not too much, not too much. I've been floating back and forth. Amanda and I finally made the solid move into a house in Charlotte, North Carolina. So
Hey,
we're right there on the border. Close enough to Carowinds to say it could go either way, and we could have some fun whenever we want. But now officially calling the Queen City. You got NYC, we've got CLT. So taking over here in the South.
the only time I've been to Charlotte was, and it's clearly you can tell how long it's been since I've spoken to Houston because I didn't even know what state he lived in. But definitely got to hit up a Bojangles again at some point.
Oh my God. If that's your idea of the South, man, we've got a few other restaurants you definitely need to come down for. North Carolina, famous for barbecue. So if you're down for some barbecue, we've got at least three places that I know we're gonna hit up. So we'll have you tired of barbecue and different types of sauces by the time you go home.
Yeah, I'd be shitting brisket blocks after I leave there.
It's gonna sit in your stomach. It'll sit in your stomach for a week, and then it'll come
But
out. Right?
good start,
Uh,
good start. I'm sure some of the
yes.
listeners stick with us. We have some good content coming. It's not going to be all about bodily fluids and waste. But anyway, I've
Hopefully
known
not.
I've known Houston for a few years now, dating back to I want to say 2017 when he was
Mhm.
here in New York City. For many reasons, which Houston, I think this will be a good time to introduce yourself and talk about, your education, where you're at today, and why I even considered bringing you on my show.
Why did you consider bringing me on your show? I feel like our tangents here are going to take over the content. No. All right. So I started off in exercise science, actually. I did my bachelor's and my master's in exercise science down at the Citadel. For those who aren't familiar, to the military college in Charleston, South Carolina. And that's probably where you got South Carolina. A lot of like my upbringing was in South Carolina. We just recently made that move to North Carolina. And so I played baseball there. I did my practicum, my internship with the strength and conditioning staff. I did another one with the CrossFit gym because hey, it was popular at the time, like 2010 to 2014. Everything was just straight up CrossFit. Um, so as I moved out of that 2015, I finished my master's. So I did my bachelor's in 3 years, master's 2 years right after that, and then thought, hey, why not more school? And an acupuncturist approached me and said, "Hey, are you still considering acupuncture at all as like a field?" And I thought, this would be a great way to supplement the recovery side of what I do from strength and conditioning. And so I said, sure. And he said, there are two schools I want you to look at. One in Boone, North Carolina. And I was like, love Boone. Awesome. Go there every year for Christmas tree. And he goes, the other one's in New York. And I was like, wait, what? I like it. Let's go. I've been in South Carolina all my life. Let's get away from the South. So I went up to New York 2015, started with Tri-State College of Acupuncture, which unfortunately is no longer there. And I think our class might have been the last graduating class. We went through let's see, first year I did a lot more like training because I had a lot of the foundations of what the school teaches in the first year. So I did a lot more training in capoeira, which you have some fun with now as well. That's it. That's right. That's right. Um, and then as the years progressed, I started getting more into the clinicals. And then eventually in 2017, I was able to join I guess it had just switched over to orthology, right? From New York Sports Med to orthology. So came in, had the pleasure of working with you and some awesome physical therapists, different locations, as well as doing my clinicals in acupuncture. Um, and then when I was finishing up, I was like, all right, this is going to be great. My fiance will move up here. We're gonna, have some fun in New York City. And then she said, you know what, the living cost is a little bit cheaper down here in South Carolina. And I was like, hey, you're right, but you know, the network here is great. You work in finance. I think it'd be a nice hub. And so she won, and I went back down to South Carolina. So I was in, and so while I was in South Carolina, or when I moved back, we were in Greenville, South Carolina. She goes, you know what? I think I want to live in a big city. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me!
No.
Like, I just came back. And she goes, well, how about Charlotte? Like, it was a big city, but you could still drive without the chaos of like New York City. And so that was our kind of like, that was our in between. That was our blend. But while I was in Greenville, because it's a service-based industry, right? Health, fitness, and wellness has to deal with your clientele. And so it was hard for me to, you know, build up a practice, build up a clientele in 6 months, 8 months down in South Carolina. So now I've made that more of what I do here in North Carolina. Got my licensure for the state, and started practicing here. And so I have a blend of all kinds of different things going on. I still love learning. Like if I could be paid to be a student, that's probably one of the things I would do, and just keep learning different things. But I got precision nutrition, so I could take on some of the nutritional aspects and feel a little bit more comfortable with not just the science, but the behavior change around what it takes to make those dietary changes, because it's not as easy as just telling somebody, hey, here's what you eat. There's a lot that goes into habit formation around that. So I found that really valuable, especially as an acupuncturist, and blending that with some of the nutritional theory that we have as part of Chinese medicine. So I also took on a position with a company called Stretch Lab, which is one-on-one assisted stretching. And I think they've actually got a couple, you know, locations up there in New York now, but their franchise system. And here in Charlotte, the owners bought like 6 locations, right? They're not all up, but they bought the licenses to 6 locations. And so we're currently at 3, getting ready to go to 4. And I am the lead flexologist for one studio, part-time lead flexologist for another one, as we transition another person into leadership there. And the master flexologist for part of I say most of the Southeast, but kind of the Southeast area, minus Florida. Florida's like its own country when it comes to like opening stretch labs. Jeez. So I train people to do what we do in studio. And between that and working my own book of business and clientele, that takes up a lot of time. But the things that I really enjoy outside of that, I still like to keep my hands in. So I still coach weightlifting. I got my USAW level 1 right before moving to Charlotte. So I coach weightlifting. I'll treat weightlifters and general population. Most of what I do from an acupuncture standpoint is orthopedic and sports medicine. And then outside of that, the like anxiety has been more of what I've started to see, just because of being in the pandemic. You know, people were isolated, and so just having kind of the human interaction was something that I didn't anticipate, but it became a thing. So did some community style acupuncture for that, just to kind of help. You know, it's a little bit more affordable, and it gets people together, right, within pandemic's rules. And I think that pretty much covers, again, the multiple hands and pots here. Yeah, somebody likened it to like a helicopter. You like to see big picture, but you distance yourself away, and then every now and then you'll focus in on different spots. And I said, well, it sounds more like I like to hop from helicopter to helicopter. I like to see the big picture over here, but I also like to see this big picture, that big picture. And so I'll hop from helicopter to helicopter, depending on where the need seems to be, right? And the fields continue to grow. I think we're going to get into that a little bit more with our next question topic of discussion. But yeah, I think I've been as long-winded as I could be for this introduction.
Well, let me tell you, if you ever planned on writing an autobiography, I think we have plenty of content already to go about that. And wow, your resume is already really impressive, even though you haven't been practicing that long. But you know, I know you and I know your knowledge set, so I definitely respect what you do for people. Now, you mentioned that like one of the things that you've been addressing aside from, orthopedics and sports medicine is anxiety with acupuncture. And I think many people, if they didn't know anything about acupuncture, probably didn't know that it can be used to treat anxiety. So
Yeah.
if you can kind of like give us a synopsis of how that might work for somebody with anxiety, and just generally what acupuncture can do for people.
Yeah, absolutely. This may seem a little backwards, but I'll start with the kind of like the protocol first, the anxiety first, and then we'll go into a little bit more like general what acupuncture does, or an acupuncturist should be doing for you. So for anxiety, it's one of those things where people are already coming in and their expectation is somebody's going to be poking me with a lot of needles, right? Or just getting poked with a needle in general. And so you don't think of that as like the anxiety treatment, but more anxiety causing. And so the first thing to do is just to sit and talk. As a clinician, the first thing is that you just got to get to know the person that's there. And that way you can meet them where they're at. And setting expectations is another really big thing when it comes to acupuncture and what type of tools that we use, and alternatives that we can utilize, and how that's going to impact. We all know about pressure points, and now we see the more common points that come out, the like one in your hand here between the thumb and forefinger. Everybody's like, yeah, just massage that one there. And it becomes like this all-purpose point. That's part of a protocol that's called the 4 gates. If we want to get into that later, we can. But just be aware, like there are common points or more common points that people can use. And while like acupressure and pressing on points is effective, it takes longer for it to make a change. So if I'm going to press on a point, then I'm looking for change to occur somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes. So we're going to be there for a little longer. Whereas if I insert an acupuncture needle, I'm expecting there to be a quicker change, whether that be a measure in heart rate, or quality of heartbeat, pulse, I should say, that's probably a better word, the quality of pulse, and states from there. The change should be quicker. And if and it's just like any other clinical skill, right? Diagnostics. If it's an appropriate diagnosis, there's a more appropriate effect or a stronger effect. And that's what we're taught to go through. There are certain protocols that you can do for anxiety. One that's known and really popular is called the NADA protocol, and NADA protocol is used for a lot when it comes to anxiety, depression, addiction relief, right? And so those points are focused within the ear, and the connection with the ear and the parasympathetic, or the vagus nerve for the parasympathetic state, is one of those things that has been researched more and more, particularly in Germany and France. There are a couple of really popular MDs who focused more of their attention on the auricular protocols and e-stim. So with that, they developed more with treating the parasympathetic nervous system and impacting the body as a whole, rather than going for points on the body, right? And then they created the homunculus of the ear. So, if it's something that has to deal with a certain part of the spine, they select a certain part of the ear. If it's something that's going on with the neck, right? It's going to be actually lower on the ear, because they imagine the body kind of flipped upside down. So the head's where kind of the earlobe is, and then you'll have kind of this like fetal position baby. So you have that wrap within the ear. So they started exploring those nuances within points in the ear, and paired that with a lot of classical Chinese medical texts and traditional Chinese medicine to make those impacts. So that's, again, a long-winded response to how you can approach anxiety. You start with that foundation. I've found that it's a lot more popular because the acupuncture, you could call them filiform, you can call them filaments, you can call them needles, whatever it is. But I tend to use the word filament just because when I demonstrate, like I'll show how flimsy an acupuncture needle itself is, just like it goes back and forth. And then you can show pictures of comparisons of the filiform or the filament in comparison to a human hair. And some of them are very close, right? A lot different. than what we might use for a lot of intramuscular needling, dry needling, things along those lines, right? And the impact that the desired outcome is a little different. So, so that's where things go from just an anxiety standpoint. Now, moving into acupuncture or an acupuncturist as a whole, right? Acupuncturists are meant to be multimodality practitioners. And that means that we do more than just look at your tongue or check your pulse and then put needles in the body and say, all right, you're done, you're good. Set you and leave you for 30, 45 minutes. Now, there are some people who are going to benefit more from that than others, but you'll find that different practitioners have different styles and how they're trained. And our school in particular had 3 styles. So we did a Japanese style, which is very gentle and very palpation based. That's reflex based. So you press a point in the abdomen, and then you choose a point location in response to that reflex, whether it's positive or negative. If it's positive, and you see if there's any change. If there's no change, you redirect. You find another spot, press that spot. Is there any change? No change. All right. And so you have this trickle down effect of like, this could impact it, this could impact it, this could impact it. And when you find that spot that changes the reflex, that's where you needle. Traditional Chinese medicine is what all schools have to go through because that's what our boards are based on. You're having to test, depending on the state, 2 to 3 boards. I took all 3. So you have traditional Chinese medical theory, point selection, so symptoms and point selection, and then biomedicine, right? So we have to be aware of pharmaceuticals and Western or allopathic diagnoses as it relates to what we do. Because of how it can impact the nervous system and therefore the trickle-down effect, musculoskeletal, endocrine, lymphatic, all that comes into play. And once you take those boards, then you have your national, board license or board certification, and then you do a state licensure. Some states I think require a separate exam, but definitely not as comprehensive as far as I'm aware as what we have to do in terms of just our boards. And then you treat, or you can gain experience in different fields, right? People are starting to specialize in fertility, or like I do, orthopedics and sports medicine, pain management. Pain management's a big one, just to like do an all-encompassing. There's GI, and people will be more involved in like combination clinics, cancer institutes, things along those lines. But they treat with different aspects. So you should be able to not only needle, cup, guasa, scrape, whatever it is that those bare minimum techniques that are coming out and super mainstream now. But you also should be able to provide nutritional guidance. You should be able to provide therapeutic exercise, mindfulness practices, and self-reflection or mental stress relief techniques, right? It's meant to address the whole body, or the whole person, I should say, the whole person. And that's where that quote unquote holistic point of view comes into play, right? We could look at that in the sense of like a biopsychosocial model, or combining trans-theoretical model with whatever physical or I say musculoskeletal filter you want to put on it. So the acupuncturist should be that looking at the whole person, because what it traditionally was like your acupuncturist was like your doctor for the community, for the town. So they saw what you did for a living. They saw what you ate. They saw how your family life was. They were within the small community, and they saw all aspects of your life so that they could treat all aspects. Hey, looks like you have a bit of a poisonous relationship with a sibling, right? Now you're sitting here and you're trying to treat the person because they can't recover because they constantly have something negatively impacted. So no matter how many needles you put in, no matter how much you change the diet, if they aren't able to heal themselves from this one aspect, they can't get rid of what it is that's actually keeping them from fully recovering. And now that things, we try to take care of so many people in so many different places, it makes it that much harder to get a feel for what all those aspects are. And that's where we start. And even you're starting to see it more and more that in your intakes, right, it has to be more encompassing as to what's going on, how ready are they to change, and how much the other things are impacting what they're experiencing, and probably they come to you because of pain, right? And what does pain mean? How do we, I'll say, how do we learn pain? And I'll tell a lot of the clients that I see in Stretch Lab, right? Pain is learned fairly similarly to movement, and that we do something, we recognize it as painful, we avoid it, and then we do something again, we recognize it as painful, and we avoid it. And over time, our body associates that with avoidance or fear, and so then you have other stimuli that could bring up that same thing, right? Let's say every time I see a yellow car, I do something that makes my low back hurt. And just like Pavlov's dog, eventually I no longer need that stimulus that makes my back hurt. When I see a yellow car, I associate that same thing. And that's a little bit of an extreme example, but it's one of those things that could happen, right? As crazy as it seems. So we look to address all those different aspects as an acupuncturist. And if we miss that, we do a disservice. So the fields, I think, are going to continue to blend because, physical therapy sees the benefits of needling, right? So now there's certifications that you can go through, and I see the education, which is what I wanted to see personally. I was like, I don't care who does it, as long as they help their patients, right? Because I'm not going to be able to see the same people you're going to see. So why should I rely on my education alone to impact this person if I know that needling is going to help them? I just want people to be trained, and I want them to be proficient, whatever it is. I'm not going to have, somebody come to me for manipulations because I haven't been trained in manipulations. Would I like to? Absolutely. But I'm not gonna do it just to say I can do it. We have something actually in Chinese medicine, Tui Na, which means push pull, and it's a form of body work to start, but it also includes manipulations. The only problem is it's not one of those yet that's been mainstream. So the training for it is relatively lacking, but it does include manipulations to a degree. And I'm like, yeah, but if I want practitioners doing manipulations, I want to make sure they had the training and they had the practice, they had the clinical practice with it before they do it on me. Unless I need to be the guinea pig for somebody to be able to do it for all their other patients, in which case I'll happily be the guinea pig to try this out. Just don't put my head on backwards. But yeah, that's I want to say that covers as much as possible within what an acupuncturist should be and what acupuncture should do. Acupuncture is two characters of needling and moxibustion. Moxibustion is another technique of lighting mugwort over points, because the current research that we have on it, or that we've translated for it, is that the frequency at which it burns is similar to our cells regeneration, and that's why it's effective. And that's why it can be utilized instead of a needling technique. But there's, different applications in what you'll see, but that acupuncture is supposed to be more than just needling. And if you walk through the door and all the person does is say, hey, how you doing here? Get in a chair. I'm going to put these in. You'll rest for 20, 30 minutes, and then you're out the door. That's not the acupuncturist you want to have.
Yeah, it's funny. When you just said Moxibustion, I'm reading a book that was recommended by my acupuncturist called A Tooth from the Tiger's Mouth.
Tom Bizio.
Tom Bizio, yeah. So I remember that word, and I think there's a lot of application to martial arts, which is what appealed to me, but also just the benefit of acupuncture in my life after sustaining an injury to my shin I received a nice martello to my shin in May. So I had a nice blood stasis injury that was manifested in my foot. And it was one of those situations where traditional physical therapy wasn't helping. And, if you're out there thinking, oh, well, you should see a physical therapist that knows what they're talking about instead of yourself, which I did. But to be honest, it was great because the acupuncturist, again, she did insert needles, but she also prescribed this herbal foot soak from the local Chinese pharmacy in my neighborhood here in New York. And this place was actually like insane. Like it was an actual, like I had to call in a prescription to get this herbal combination. And I had a pot of herbs, water, and vodka on my stove for like a week.
Which is great. Yeah.
But it's like, but like to understand how those herbs work, to understand how internal organs also manifest in tissue injuries, is something that I wasn't familiar with, and I'm glad that there are people who are experts at that. And it's not to say
Yeah.
that it works all the time. Like, I've obviously done acupuncture before and I haven't had a similar effect, but for this particular condition of blood just pooling in my
Yeah.
foot, it was massive for me to like wake up and not feel like I had like stabbing pain in my foot. And I'm really grateful for acupuncturists because of the way they're able to look at all the things that I don't look at. And I feel like now I'm better able to have conversations with people who might respond better to traditional Chinese medicine than Western medicine. And it's not necessarily this dichotomous situation where you have to do one versus the other, but
Yes.
certainly if someone's going to respond better, you want to, do what's in their best interest. And it's just crazy, like even the things about changing temperatures of environment, like we talk
Yep.
about that. I mean, I've spoken about that, about like sleep quality and making sure that the temperature in your room is on the cooler side, but generally you want to keep, I think traditional Chinese medicine likes keeping limbs warm, but
Hmm.
also being mindful of internal versus external temperatures
Yeah.
and the contrast. So now that I think of injury in that context as well, it really helps me when someone's like, "Should I ice it?" And I never say ice it anymore. I
Yeah.
never prescribe ice. I never prescribe cold. I always prescribe either nothing or heat.
Or heat.
Uh, Yeah, so and it's also it's dependent on the stage of injury. I haven't forgotten about
Exactly.
tissue
Yeah.
healing and inflammatory processes,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
it's like it's one of those things where it's like, why are people still icing injuries?
A year
It's
later, that's I just absolutely baffling when somebody's like, yeah, I've been icing it. Whenever it starts to hurt again, I'll ice it. I was like, does the ice help? And they're like, it doesn't feel as bad. I'm like, but does it help? And they're like, no, not really. I mean, I still feel it the next day. I'm like, then stop doing it, right? Definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results.
I actually heard that yesterday. That's kind of weird that you said that, but it's kind of crazy with ice because like I feel like most people feel better because they're just simply relaxing and not provoking their injury. Like they have
Sure.
something that's desensitizing the area because it's changed the local temperature, which is
Yeah.
altering the pain signals most likely. But
Right.
especially if it's with a combination of compression and elevation, like I would argue that those methods are more effective than the ice itself. So
Sure.
if anyone's mind blown out there, this is what we're here for. You can
Yeah.
reach out to us, and I'll tell you how later on. But let's keep it moving.
Okay. Oh
So
man, I could have gone right on that tangent right there. We could have
go, no,
stopped.
go for it. Go.
Okay. So just like the liniment that you received, right? We do have what's called like herbal ice, and one of my favorite like kind of trauma in Tom Bizio's book, you'll have this, and I encourage you at some point to maybe talk about it a little bit more because it's really cool and how those herbs interact. But you have cold factors and hot factors, and then with your body you have internal and then you have your environment, which is the external. So you have internal pathogenic factors, external pathogenic factors. And if you look at Chinese medicine, right, there is the yin and yang, which is actually a three component. Most people just see it as this dichotomy, right, of one versus the other, but it's not. The symbol itself and the little dots that you see of the opposite color within are considered seeds. So you're looking at this balance between the two, that in the most yang or the white color, you have a seed of the dark or the seed of yin. And then within the most yin, you have a seed of yang, and the two generate one another. It's not one battling against the other. It's this continuous rotation, this continuous cycle of balance. And then you have the 5-element theory. And so these are the most foundations. The 5-element theory came a little bit later. Everything started with yin and yang and everything in between. So those are the three. And then you have your 5 elements, and that is water. And that's kind of where we start. That's like our general essence, our constitution: wood, fire, earth, and metal. And each of those elements has to do with different organ systems within our body. And so that's where, when you started talking about the visceral application in the organ systems, it's not always referring to the physical organ or the physiological organ function itself, but there are functions of those organ systems. And so based on that is where you start to see some of these herbal selections as what needs to be balanced out within that yin and yang and 5-element system and theories. And then what are the properties of the plant itself? Where does it grow? Does it thrive in a colder environment? If it does, it's going to have a little bit more of a warming effect, right? That's the property. It's able to survive because it's able to internally warm itself and live. So that's how you see some of these, just like plants. How do you prepare it? If you leave it boiling for hours, well, now we've changed the property from what might have been a cold to now a warm or a hot heat variable. So your preparation and your treatment of these herbs also impacts how it's going to impact your body. When we look at something like blood stasis, you're looking at temperature, but you're also looking at invigoration. So the moving of blood, right? So you used a great word, which is stasis. It's one that we always use. It's either chi, you'll see like chi stagnation or blood stagnation, blood stasis. Blood stasis is like the most stagnant of all. And you're like, all right, what do I need to do? It's not that I need more blood. I want to invigorate the movement of blood. And that could be because I don't have enough chi. If I don't have enough chi, I can't move blood. If I don't have enough energy, right, I can't push the boulder. I can't move anything. But if I have enough energy and I'm pushing it, it's still stuck, then maybe I need to break something down. So those different properties are going to continue to go in. When it comes to something as simple as like saying somebody to ice or not ice, just like you said, an acupuncturist should be aware of just the basic tissue healing components, right? What's happening within the first 48, 72 hours, what's then happening over the next 10 days, next 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. And depending on severity, you're looking at 6 to 9 months. Easily, and be upfront with those expectations. Like, this is how your body works, right? It's just how the body works itself out. And when I recommend ice, it's usually, like you said, early on in a treatment or in an injury process. Is it hot? Is it swollen? Right? Is it hot? Is it red? Is it swollen? So if it's hot and red, right, physically you can touch it, then applying light ice is something that's definitely worth it in the beginning, right? But even then, it's short stints, no more than 12 minutes. 8 to 12 minutes is really where we kind of sit with this one. Unless there's, again, more research, more translation that I'm unaware of over the last probably 2 years. And as much as research is coming out right now, it definitely could be. But right now, like 8 to 12 minutes max is where you're sitting at. And then in between that, you start to invigorate, you start to move things. So you apply gentle massage and you're trying to flesh out. So let's say it's something in the ankle, right? You're going to try to move it up the leg, get it into that kind of like Venus return, right? So that can be expelled. The waste can be expelled. And I figure we wouldn't come back to bodily waste, but here we are. But you're looking at this combination. If I can't do it internally, how can I affect it externally? And Amanda, actually, my fiance, had an injury when we were in New York. We went to sled, and somebody had built this ramp in Prospect Park, and we took turns kind of going off of it. She came off of it one time and her foot caught and it rotated, sprained the ankle. So we got back to the apartment and we applied what's called San Juan San. And I don't know the tones to that, so I apologize if somebody's listening and they're like, golly, he has no Chinese. And you're right, I don't. I'm sitting here like I know more Japanese. That's where but San Juan San was applied and we left it on overnight. And what you do is it's like a plaster, more of a plaster than a liniment. The liniment would be more like liquid. So we applied the plaster, wrapped it up, put it in a sock, woke up the next day, and there were some other treatment aspects involved, but from a legality standpoint, probably something I shouldn't have been doing. Just still being a student, but she said okay, and she was able to walk on it. She was there for New York Fashion Week, and so she had to go to different like auditions to walk for different designers, and she was able to make it happen that day. So just overnight being able to utilize something like that, the herbal ice, as well as some of the other techniques, like just to get blood moving, and get her back to a point where, we say motion is lotion, right? I liken this to like where they were going with basketball ankle sprains. Like don't immobilize it and that be the end all, right? As soon as they can start to move it again, start going through those ranges of motion. So we did that, and she made it through all of what she needed to do the next day. Now, was it still sore and achy at the end of the day? Absolutely, right? There's still the recovery itself of the tissue that needed to happen. But that was like my first experience as a student where somebody had this traumatic injury, and like a liniment and a plaster made such a drastic difference. And I was like, holy smokes. And this came straight from Tom Bizzio's book, A Tooth from a Tiger's Mouth. And he does a great job of applying that knowledge, especially from, like you said, a martial arts standpoint. But yes, herbal ice is what we have, and it's not necessarily ice. It's something that may have a little bit more of that cold and warm aspect to the herbs that helps with the movement of blood. And that's my tangent.
I dig it, man. I dig it. All right, let's keep it rolling for real this time. No more tangents. We gotta stay on track here. Now,
Okay.
in the field of physical therapy, I've seen over the past, and I guess you can argue I'm one of the people, but now people want to start businesses pretty early after school. Some people are even creating online brands while they're in school. So when they come out, they have like tens of thousands of followers on Instagram and they're out there promoting their product. Now, I certainly don't think there's a problem with starting early, but sometimes I see people try to build these massive personas without having much of a foundation, either with clinical skill or just an understanding of business, because they don't teach you business operations in physical therapy school. I mean, they probably do it so a little bit more in acupuncture, from my understanding, but even if it's not that much, it's definitely more than what we get in PT school. So, what would be your thoughts on this emergence of younger clinicians and trainers for that matter, and how they should go about starting up a business?
Ooh, not a loaded question. Definitely a good question. When looking at where you're at in terms of your education and knowing scope of practice, I think that those are the first two things that I go to, because it's one thing to share what you're learning. It's another to say that if everybody who has an ankle sprain needs to have this liniment or this plaster, two entirely different things, right? I've found that this can be applied to ankle sprains. And some people are going to take that to mean like, oh, every time I have an ankle sprain, this is what I'm going to use. Again, not necessarily the case, but making sure that when we educate, we put it within parameters. And you'll see a lot of, and I'm going to say better clinicians, because I think it's better if somebody initiates something with, this is not medical advice. This is what we have to, this is what we have learned. And this is not a be all end all for all cases whatsoever. But here's an example of how that works. And you'll see that people who are more understanding are going to ride within that middle portion of the spectrum. They're not going to ride at an extreme. They're not going to say everything's this or everything's that. They're going to say every individual is different, and that's going to be different. And so somebody who can distinguish that within their platform, that's going to be one of the foundations. In terms of starting a business, again, I would say it comes down to context. Whether you're young or whether you're old, you can make the same mistakes, just not having been in the experience. I didn't have a lot of business experience coming out of school. And so I am very much the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid, because as you can tell, I could easily go on a tangent and talk a bunch, but miss the main point that I want to put in, and the main message that I want to put into that. And so looking at business operations, that was one of those things where you're like, all right, what are the key components I have to have from a business standpoint? And what are the key aspects that I have to remember from a legal standpoint? And you may notice I don't put a ton of content out myself. I am very much more all right, let me find the resources that I find the most valuable and the most useful, and I'm going to put out their content. And that may be from a behavioral standpoint, it may be from a physical intervention standpoint, whatever it may be in terms of education. I'm going to find trusted resources, and that's where I defer. So if you're going to, if you want to build credibility because you're young and you're like, I need to get out in the field, and I need to have experience, absolutely. Right? Go out, get experience, but understand again where you are within the scope of practice, and what you can and can't do. That's scope of practice. That's the hardest thing, I think, is that some people are like, oh, well, if I know about this, then I can do that. And that's not the case. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, or if you have more specifics within that question that I can answer. But.
No, not necessarily. I just wanted to get your perspective because you are, I guess you could still, you're a relatively new clinician. You're not so
Yeah.
new anymore. Newer than I am because I'm going gray already and been around the block a couple
Oh man,
times.
that's why I'm wearing the
Uh,
hat.
yeah, but I'll take the wisdom. I'll take the wisdom, and I certainly feel wiser. And it was funny. I was talking to someone yesterday about becoming that wisdom is like beginning to question more of what you're doing. So as I get more
Yeah,
experience, I feel like I have less answers, but because it's more akin to what you were talking about in the ankle sprain situation where it's like it could be treated this way versus this way. There's not exactly like I'm going to do this for every ankle sprain, which I think is a sign of wisdom, although it can be quite frustrating because taking an
sure.
individual as a whole, like depending on their relationship with their family, anxiety, their nutrition, their sleep, etc. I'm not necessarily going to treat one individual with an ankle sprain. I'm not even just necessarily. I won't treat them the
Yeah,
same. So
absolutely.
yeah.
I think
Anyway,
that's a
yeah, yeah.
I
Keep going.
I
Yeah, go
like
for it,
that.
man.
I like that too. You develop your system. You don't develop, purely just a treatment protocol, and this is the only thing that you follow. You develop a system of steps, right? From evaluation, or sorry, intake to evaluation, to your own diagnosis, and then a treatment plan. And within that treatment plan, there's also adaptability, right? Within your system, you set something, and we'll talk a little bit about, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but you have something that's stable. But within that stability, there's also flexibility. And if we look at this physically, we would call that mobility, the ability to control as well as adapt. But the stability of a system, right, to follow core principles that we know, and then be able to adapt to specific changes, or lack of change, right? If you put an intervention and nothing changes, then we have the flexibility to adapt within that system. You're like, all right, this intervention didn't work, but guess what? We're still within the same system. We're going to apply the same principles, just to a slightly different variable, so that we do see change, right?
Right.
I think that's where you're hitting home with the wisdom, right? The more I learn, the less I know, right? The
Yeah.
more I learn, the less I know.
Cool, man. Yeah, I've realized that if we talk for too long, people will probably turn the podcast off. So let's hit
Okay,
our last points and then we'll get to it. It's one of those like
solid.
too long didn't read situations, just on
Sure.
air. So one of the things that appeals as well, like, and I didn't even know you did capoeira when I first met you. I think I kind of did, and I didn't know you were still doing it. But I love that you also blend resistance training and capoeira, and I think you can appreciate that one lends to another in being just a overall peak performer. And I don't know, and I know you've competed in weightlifting and obviously are training capoeira. So in terms of being a consummate peak performer, what would you say would be the keys to peak performance?
One key: consistency. That's going to be where I center everything else around. Uh, it's a commitment to the process and not to the end goal, because I can set a goal, but once I achieve that goal, then then I would, if I'm focused just around that goal, then I have to start all over again. But if I'm dedicated or I am committed to a process of consistency, then no matter what that goal is, once I'm done, I can set a new one and I still have my process in place, right? Or if I want to wait to set a new quote unquote goal, then I can still follow the system that helped me to achieve the results that I got and potentially move further ahead, but while within that process. So the follow-up to consistency is consistency with a process, right? Don't consistently change, because if you consistently change, then the consistency is not necessarily there, right? I'm consistently doing something new, and so there's never a mastery. Bruce Lee, right, said, I don't fear the man who knows 10,000 kicks, but who's performed one kick 10,000 times. It was a commitment to the process and mastery from that standpoint. So I think peak performance for me looks like consistent commitment to a process.
Consistent commitment to a process. If you don't remember anything else from this podcast, please remember that.
Sure.
Here's a fun one I didn't anticipate asking. What is your most lethal capoeira kick?
Martelo de solo.
Martello G solo.
Martelo
That's
de solo.
interesting because my group does not use that term. It's also amazing. Like people don't realize, people think capoeira is the same universally,
No,
but different groups have different
yeah.
terminology. I just think the essence of it
Ooh,
is the same. In the go for it. You have
I
something
gotta
to say.
change. It's not Martelo de solo. It's Meia Lua de Compasso.
Okay.
Yeah, Meia Lua de Compasso, and yeah, I something about that move just like resonated with me, because there's within capoeira, right? You have things that you can hide, intent. And that one just always felt easier. The stability, again, of like 3 limbs on the floor and then having something else that I could do, or even 2 limbs, right? But stability and then flexibility to kind of manipulate it. I recently played a game last weekend. We talked about this beat and bow workshop, but we also played a little bit. So I played a couple of capoeiristas that I hadn't ever seen before, hadn't met before. And I always love that, because it's like, it's meeting them, right? It's getting to know them. And the guy just kept telling me, he was like, dude, what do you do with your Meia Luas? How do you work with your Meia Luas? And so that's when it hit me. It was like, yeah, that's right. I used to train Meia Luas a lot. Meia Lua de Compasso was just like, it was one of those things that I'm upside down and then I'm up. I'm upside down and then I'm up.
Yeah.
And that's where I came in. But yes, going back, sorry, to the language component, like you use certain words that I'm like, what is he talking? And then you do you go through the movie. And I was like, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's capoeira is so beautiful in that sense, where though
Hmm.
there are many differences, the essence is all in Brazilian culture, Afro-Brazilian culture, and
Yes.
just the fact. And we were talking about making berimbaus, which was our traditional instrument, from scratch. It's like it doesn't get more authentic than that.
No,
And I
it's
think
awesome.
I think at some point, I mean, I have a berimbau in my apartment. Maybe we could practice sometime and get some tocando in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we
Tocando
are.
berimbau.
Yeah,
Yeah. E
yeah,
jogando
we.
capoeira.
I love it. I love it. All right. Any parting thoughts or statements for our listeners?
We talked about peak performance, and we got to discuss a little bit of this beforehand too. But I think in part with that is balance, right? I made a note that balance in life is really important to peak performance. We can't constantly train the same way. We can't just keep, go up, go up, go up, go up, go up. We eventually have to have essentially like an off season, right, where we put our attention maybe a little bit somewhere else. And so giving yourself time to reflect on the progress that you've made. And in training, we could call that a deload week, right? But
Hmm.
balance in life, I think, is really important. And finding inspiration, not motivation. Motivation dies out, but inspiration is internal. So we think of external versus internal cues, right? Uh, external motivation is one of those things that's it's great, and it's a catalyst. It's New Year's resolutions are a great motivator, right? But they're not an inspirator. They're not inspiring. Let's put that. They're not inspiring. Inspiration is internal, and it's a resonance with a why, a purpose, and something that's like long term. provides you that key or that direction for that process, to provide that consistency, to that commitment to a process. So for parting words here, right? Maintain balance, whatever that means, in terms of your training, in terms of nutrition, in terms of self-care. All of those aspects need to be in balance, work-life balance, right? And then find what inspires you, right? Find that why. And because we see these places that are considered blue zones, right? Consistent centenarians. And one of the key things that started to come up, it wasn't necessarily the diet, because everybody's like, oh, they live longer because this is how they eat. It wasn't just what they ate, it's how they ate. And the fact that they woke up every morning with a purpose. They knew what they needed to do, to make what their world better. See a need, fill a need from that. I could throw so many quotes out there, but I think inspiration is another key component. Inspiration versus motivation.
For sure. Now, if people did want some more of Houston's wisdom and quotes, where would be the best places to reach you?
Easiest there's going to be Instagram, right? Only Human, letter O, letter N, number 1, letter Y, and then human is spelled a little different, right? Hughman. So Only Human. That's that's right. So Only Human on Instagram. You can reach out to me via email. That's acuprperformance@gmail.com. Again, acuprperformance@gmail.com. And for those who are wanting to like just chat it up, right? Shoot a text to my work number, because it's an easy one for me to respond to as well. 864-869-8782. There's a lot of 8s in there. 864-869-8782. Yeah, that's it. Okay. But yeah, I encourage you to do Instagram first, because that's the one typically I can respond to the fastest. I know it sounds weird, but it is. And then second to that would be email. Third to that would be the number.
Sounds good, my man. Sounds good. And
Yeah.
as always, fue meu prazer. But just to keep it, obrigado,
Igual.
and thank you.
Obrigado.
And anyway, beautiful people, I want to again thank Houston for his time and insight. Now get out there and make shit happen.